Welcome to the Council of Better Business Bureau's podcast, The Bistro, where we will discuss today's hottest consumer trends, predict the future with consumer experts, and learn how elite businesses and entrepreneurs continue to push the envelope in today's marketplace.
Hello and welcome to The Bistro. Thank you for joining us for the Better Business Bureau. I'm your host, Elaine Espinola. Today we're sharing tips on the best way to get into college. Wouldn't it be great to know exactly how to increase your chances of getting into the college of your choice? As with anything, the more you know, the more empowered you can be in the process. Our guest expert is Karen Spencer, a college admissions consultant from College Coach, which is the nation's leading provider of educational advising, offering expert guidance from the best college admissions consultants on the college admissions and finance process. Karen, welcome to The Bistro, and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Karen, before we get into the more specific details for students preparing to get into college, what is the number one overall thing students and or parents should do to prepare for entrance into college?
I always tell parents this, and it's never what they think I'm going to say, but I always tell parents particularly that the best thing they can do to help their child with this process is to make sure they make it about their child and not about them. And I always say, I mean this with all due respect. You and I were just talking. I'm a parent of 3 children myself. I get how intrinsically tied our happiness can be to theirs on occasion. But as I tell every parent, this is not your opportunity to send your child to the college you wanted to go to and didn't get into, or send your child to the college you wanted to go to and your parents wouldn't pay for, or where you really liked at the library and your kid could have cared less, or about the bumper sticker. Make sure that your child is really driving this process, and I promise you, you will already start this process off on a better start.
You know what? That is a great overall tip for parents in general. So can you share with us your background as a college admissions consultant and a little bit about College Coach?
Sure. So I've worked for College Coach for coming up to 12 years. In fact, I just had my 12-year anniversary yesterday. And before that, I worked at Georgetown University here in D.C. I was the assistant director of admission there. And before that, at Franklin and Marshall College in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Came to College Coach because I got kind of tired of denying 80% of the applicant pool at Georgetown every spring. That got a little depressing. College Coach is a team of former admissions officers and financial aid officers, and we help private families as well as corporations, as one of their corporate benefits, help guide students through the college admissions process. We also do a lot of other educational advising, but that's kind of our bread and butter.
Okay, wonderful. So let's bring it back to a student, for example, that might be in high school. I know this is a big question that comes up often. Okay, kids want to know, and parents want to know too, is it better to get an A in regular classes or a B in those honors or AP classes?
So I will tell you that my colleagues and I will tell you we get this question more than just about any question in the whole breadth of questions we could get. And even when we worked in admissions, we probably got that question at least once a day. And the answer is, most of my answers actually usually are it depends, which is probably very frustrating for many people. But, you know, you always have to take circumstances into account. That said, generally speaking, if you can pull a B or higher in an honors or an AP course, we'd prefer you do that versus getting straight A's in kind of fluffy, regular level courses. And the reason is because we want to see that you've pushed yourself in high school. You know, I always say GPA is not particularly a helpful number because it doesn't tell me what kinds of courses those grades were in, how difficult they were in. It doesn't tell me if you got a C in physics or in gym. You know, so that's why GPA is not particularly helpful. We really look at your grades in conjunction with the courses they're in. And so we pay a lot of attention to your curriculum. So generally speaking, if you can get a B or better in an honors or an AP course and you're still, you know, able to spend time on the rest of your courses, you can still do your extracurricular activities, you're still getting decent amounts of sleep, that's, you know, that's what we would go with.
Okay, excellent answer. Thank you, because I know that comes up often. Now, students are then looking to take either an ACT or an SAT. What is the difference between these two tests?
So the first thing I want to drive home, and I think this is a very common and very still pervasive myth, despite the fact it's been false the entire time, is that there's no preferred test. Schools will happily take either the ACT or the SAT. They're just a little bit more regionally well known. The ACT is still more commonly taken in the middle of the country, think Nevada to Ohio. And then the SAT is still a little bit more commonly taken on the East and the West Coast. But every college in the country will happily take either test. That has always been the case. The SAT is a little bit more nuanced. It's more about logic and reasoning. The questions are a little bit more challenging. They're a little longer. For that reason, there are less of them on the test. Students who we call kind of traditionally good standardized test takers sometimes prefer the SAT. The ACT is more a test of what's taught in the classroom. It's more curriculum driven. It's a more black and white test. You either kind of know the answer or you don't. For that reason, there are more questions on that test, and so there's more to get through. There is also a science component on that is not on the SAT. Students who do really well in the classroom and don't often test as well as their grades would imply they should, sometimes much prefer the ACT. I know I personally did, but that was me.
Would it perhaps behoove an individual to take both tests?
In a perfect world, I would love to see every student take a practice test in both.
Okay.
The PSAT is pretty commonly given universally in October of either a sophomore or a junior year. The pre-ACT is not as commonly given, but you can go to any diagnostic center, anybody who does testing, tutoring, they will be able to give you a diagnostic in that. And then you can see if you have a natural proclivity on one or the other. About 80% of students are going to do about the same on both tests, but 20% are going to do much better on one over the other, and you just don't know if you're that student unless you've taken both tests.
Okay, and I'm assuming also if you're a student who happens to know exactly where you want to go, you might be able to look into that college and find out if there's a preference from that institution.
So yeah, like I said, institutions don't have a preference, but sometimes you can see what their median 50% is, and then you can kind of sense whether or not your testing is really hitting that target or not.
Okay, excellent. So speaking of those colleges, now, when is a good time for students to go visit a college?
I always say there's never really a bad time necessarily to visit a college. There are better times than others. The worst is not to visit at all. If there's another piece of advice I could give as universally to, really drive home is the importance of the college visit. I cannot emphasize that enough. I've never known a family to visit and regret that decision ever. So ideally, I think it's great to visit second semester of junior year during school, if possible. And the reason for that is by the second semester of junior year, you have enough academic information to know what's even a viable option for you. You have 5 semesters of grades. You hopefully have some kind of testing, even if it is, again, a PSAT or a pre-ACT, to give you a sense for ballpark of what you can envision on the real test. And, you have a better sense for maybe what you might want to study, what kind of atmosphere you want. You're a little bit more mature than you would be as a freshman when, you've just gotten out of 8th grade and you probably have no idea. I like for students to visit when school is in session, ideally. It's the best chance to see the culture of a school, right? Is everybody here in, blue hair and Birkenstocks? Is everybody here in pearls and Prada? Do you care? Is everybody at the library, a party, the football game? You get a sense for the school culture, which is super important and why the visit is so important. That's harder to gauge if school is not in session.
Absolutely. Definitely very important. Now, how many colleges in general are students applying to these days? How many should they be applying to?
Well, those are probably 2 different answers. What they're doing and what they should be doing are often not the same thing, which is why people need to talk to us, because we'll tell you that that's probably not a wise choice. I think people err on either too little or more often these days too many colleges. I think students think their odds go up. I'm going to apply to 14 schools and my odds go up of getting into all of them. And I have to remind them that's not how statistics work. If you're not qualified for 14, you're still not qualified for 14. So I say about 6 to 10 is where I think most people want to hit. I think the key things to making a good college list are that you legitimately like every school on your list and that you have a nice range of schools. I always say 2, no problems, call them safeties, call them whatever you want, have to be on there. Those are non-negotiable to me. And then after that, the mix of, kind of target and reach schools, I'm a little bit more flexible about. But as long as you like all of those schools on your list, what people often do is they apply to all dreams and then one safety they have no desire to get into, which is kind of a hot mess of a plan. Or they won school and then they find out, they've been admitted maybe, but they don't now in April think, oh, I might have like to have more options than just that one school. So those are some common mistakes I see.
Do you also do consulting for students who maybe get into a college but then want to transfer?
Yes, and we do absolutely do that. I was actually the transfer coordinator at both Georgetown and F&M. So yeah, it does happen. I do truly believe that 96% of students really end up where they're meant to be most of the time. I do believe that. But there are people who, for whatever reason, find themselves in the wrong school. And transferring, that process can be very different from school to school. Just like freshman admissions can be different. Transfer, some don't take spring transfers. Some are going to want to see your test scores. Some are not. So yes, we help people with that process all the time as well.
Okay, now another question that seems to come up often, in addition to the grades, of course, but the activities of high school students. What in general are colleges looking for?
I generally say there's no right or wrong activity. There's just lack of activity. I always say if your student is coming home at 3 o'clock more often than not, they probably are not busy enough if they don't have anything else to do for the rest of the day. But what they do is really up to them. I want students to find things they really enjoy, because then they will be doing them at a better level. They'll want to stick with them. We don't like to see a year of this, a year of that, a year of this. That doesn't make us think you're well-rounded. It makes us think that you can't commit to anything. We'd rather see 3 or 4 years of the same activity, but that you've dedicated yourself to that. So whether that's Girl Scouts or the tennis team or having a job or community service, whatever that is fine. That all said, I do always joke that nobody ever got into college because of the Spanish club, right? Or the French club, German club, fill in the blank, whatever you want, right? I was in the German club in high school. We made, schnitzel one weekend. We spoke a little German and got our pictures in the yearbook, and that was kind of the end of the day. That's not going to carry the same weight as somebody who, goes to football practice 14 hours a week or works, in the Target grocery aisle, checking out, people for 15 hours on the weekends or whatever the case may be. So there's a reason we ask for how many weeks a year you've done something, how many days a week, and how many hours a week, to give us a sense for kind of time commitment.
Gotcha. So it's really not any particular activity, but just that you're doing some activity with some substance.
Yes.
Okay. Now let's quickly talk about early action and early decision. Can you help us understand the difference?
Yeah, this gets people really confused for very understandable reasons. Early action and early decision have a lot of similarities, but a few very key differences. So the similarities between early action and early decision, often referred to as EA and ED, are that applications are usually due November 1st, maybe November 15th. But I'd say that's a pretty common deadline. You usually get to find out one way or the other by middle to end of December. So that's the advantage, is you have the potential to find out early on. Now, keep in mind, in either of those, you could get deferred, which means you still have to wait. So it's not always a done deal that you know an answer one way or the other, but you have at least potential that you don't have to wait as long. Where the differences come in is that early action is a non-binding agreement, meaning if you applied to Georgetown, where I used to work, for example, and you got in through early action, you didn't have to go. You could, but you don't have to. And you still have until May to make that decision. You can see where else you've gotten in. You have choices to make. Or Franklin and Marshall, where I used to work, that was early decision. If you got in, you had to go. You signed a binding contract. Your guidance counselor has said they will not send your transcript anywhere else. So early decision can be great for some students. It is not for everybody.
Gotcha. Well, these are all very excellent and very helpful and specific tips for anyone looking to apply to college. Just to kind of wrap it all up, can you share your top 3 tips for someone looking to get into college?
Absolutely. And I'm sure my 3 tips might be different than my colleagues, but these would be mine. The first would be the importance of the college visit. I know I said it earlier, but again, I cannot emphasize the importance of the college visit. Please get on a college campus with your children. The second thing would be to discuss finances with your children. I don't actually do that financial aid perspective, but so many people do not have this conversation early enough with their kids. Their kids end up applying to a college that they ultimately can't afford. And now we have a lot of tears and confusion about why this was not on the table to begin with. So have that discussion, whatever that is, your family values or your family values, that's fine. But make sure you discuss that with your children far in advance of them applying. And then again, no more than 10 schools, I would say. You can't be in love with 15 different colleges. You can only go to one. You can only do so much well. Time is finite. These applications can sometimes have multiple essays that are not recyclable. So you could be finding yourself writing upwards of 15 to 16 essays, perhaps. So no more than 10 schools, generally speaking. Those would be my top 3.
Okay, thank you. So how can people find out more information from College Coach?
So you could go to our website, which is www.getintocollege.com, and it will give you all of our services. It will show you pictures of all our former admissions officers and financial aid officers and tell you all the things that we do.
Okay, and most impressive, will you share with us your success rate for anyone working with a college coach?
Absolutely. 100% of our students get into college and 95% get into one of their very top choices.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so very much for speaking with us today on The Bistro, Karen. You know, the Better Business Bureau is deeply committed to building and advancing a better marketplace, a trusted marketplace for all, because trust always matters. For the Better Business Bureau and as your host of The Bistro, I'm Elaine Espinola, and I thank you for listening, and I encourage you to give us your feedback on this episode. Until next time, it's been my pleasure discussing better business with you.
You just enjoyed the Bistro podcast. Be sure to tune in next month for a brand new episode. To learn more about our other shows, visit betterbusiness.blueberry.com. That's betterbusiness.blubry.com and subscribe. The thoughts and opinions expressed on this podcast are the views and opinions of the guests, not those of the Better Business Bureau, Council of Better Business Bureaus, or program affiliates. This podcast is for information and educational purposes only and is copyrighted with all rights reserved. This podcast is protected by Blue.